My teenage sons and I were camping in a dispersed site off of NF 3102 for a few days. On the morning of the 12th, just after 6 a.m., I was making coffee when I heard a guttural growling noise that rose to a higher-pitched scream and then became a whooping sound, after which it dropped back down to a growl. This sequence repeated 3 times. My dog freaked out barking, but would not go past the saplings on the east edge of the camp, which is strange because he usually pursues deer, elk, and bears several hundred yards into the woods. I grabbed my bow and walked past the line of saplings into an open forest that sloped down into a ravine with area of dense vegetation. I called my dog to follow, but he would not come. The forest in the area is full of downed trees, where my sons and I had gathered firewood the previous afternoon. I believe the sound came from the vegetation and trees at the bottom of the ravine, which we had been within 30 feet of when gathering downed wood. I only walked for about 20 feet past the saplings and stood on a log for a better view, but did not see anything moving. I then decided to go back to camp, being a bit worried because my dog wouldn't leave the area of our tent. For the next hour and a half, I sat with my bow next to me, the dog sitting on my legs, and listened to many instances of downed branches cracking beyond the saplings. When the cracks stopped, it was abruptly, not fading as if the cause were moving away. These were large branches being broken, similar to the sound of a bear breaking wood. My dog is not afraid of bears and has chased away several, including one of the previous week in eastern Idaho. About half an hour after the cracking sound stopped, the dog went out into the forest to investigate. Everything seemed to return to normal. It was then that I heard again the squirrels angrily chirping and chattering at the dog, and realized that I had not heard it at all during the noises or crackling. I have never heard anything in the Blue Mountains, Rockies, or Cascades like this sound. It sounded nothing like deer, elk, moose, bear, mountain lion, or bobcat. The only thing I could possibly think is maybe a mountain lion was killing an elk, but repeated 3 times with just the same length and cadence. And the whooping part of it reminded me of those plastic bellows hoses that you swing in the air to make a whistling whooping sound. While in Pendleton, a couple of days later, I was describing the sounds to a local hunter when an older native woman overheard, and she said she thinks it was a Bigfoot and that she's heard them on the reservation. Here's some background on me. I have spent a large part of my life in the woods between Eddington, where I grew up, and DeBlois, where my grandfather built a hunting-fishing camp in the 1920s. Everywhere in between hunting, fishing, camping, and hiking. I have walked those woods since I was 4 years old, and I'm now 61. I know the deer, moose, bear, and other wildlife of those same woods. I built my camp on Spectacle Pond in Osborne in 1988. I spent a lot of time in the years since exploring the woods and waters around the camp over the years, and know the area between Route 179 and Route 193 better than most, and within 10 miles of my camp, better than anybody. Since 2008, when I retired from the U.S. Navy, I spent 1 month every year at my camp, 2 weeks in May, fishing, and 2 weeks in November hunting. I have spent many days and nights in the most remote areas of that part of Maine. On the evening of November 12th, 2020, my wife and I had returned to our camp after an afternoon deer hunt, and it was dark by the time we got back to camp and settled in for a routine evening with getting the camp warmed up. Supper, a couple hands of cribbage and talking. We had been in camp for 10 days. At around 8:30, my wife decided to go to bed as we planned to hunt in the morning. I picked up my book and was reading until 10:30 at night. The only light within a half-mile of my camp was the single gaslight in the front room of the camp, which I was using to read. The nearest people were a half-mile away in their camp, back toward Route 9. I decided to call it a night at 10:30, and wanted to go relieve myself before I went to bed. So I went outside across the porch, down the front steps, and walked approximately 15 feet to the back outside corner of the camp. Within seconds of standing in that spot, there was two very loud thwack sounds just inside the woodline, which is only 15 yards across the backyard. It took me by surprise, as I've never heard that sound made completely by itself in the woods. It sounded identical to somebody taking a large stick of firewood and hitting a tree in full swing. I could easily replicate that noise as in knocking snow, ice off firewood against a tree, but with sheer force. I did not have a flashlight with me, as the diffused light from the gaslight inside the camp gave me enough point of reference to get back inside, so I didn't think to bring one with me. I stood there, perplexed as to what I had just heard, and trying to make sense of it, when it happened again, but this time a little farther away, maybe 30 yards, but still very loud. This repeated itself 10 or 11 times, over a period of 3 minutes, each time a little more distant than before. I remained standing there as I was still trying to figure out what the thwacking of these trees was. After the hitting of the trees dissipated, I returned to the camp and locked the door. I did not and still don't know what it was, but I knew it was not a person, a moose, deer, or bear. Of note, there was absolutely no light as in a flashlight from a person. Additionally, those woods are extremely thick with dead spruce and fir. Lots of blowdowns, yet there was absolutely no noise. No snapping branches, breaking twigs. Just silence. I can tell you firsthand that nobody could walk down through in there during the broad daylight, much less at night without a flashlight, without snapping branches and making a lot less noise. I spent an additional hour in camp that night, reflecting on what I had heard and trying to attribute it to something that made sense. There was none in all my experience. I went to bed, and when we got up Friday morning, we decided to hang out at camp to get a start on packing and cleaning, as we were closing up camp and leaving on Saturday. I walked into the woods during daylight, where I heard another thwack noise the night before, but found nothing where I expected to see some type of sign. Needless to say, I didn't tell my wife about those events until Saturday morning as we were getting ready to leave. I still have no idea what it was, and it was so dark. I didn't see anything, but I can tell you that I've never heard or experienced anything like that in the many years I've spent in those woods, and the 30+ years I've owned that camp. Two incidents, years apart, same woods. Background: I've been hunting in northern Florida for 30 years. I have a BS in wildlife ecology and a MS in fisheries. I am currently employed as a research biologist for a federal agency. There have been two incidents during these two hunts that I'm going to talk about that still haunt you. Mind you, I have hunted about every WMA in North Florida, spending 3 to 4 weeks a year in the woods for 35 years. For work, I have been on most of the rivers in the southeast. These two incidents are the only two where I didn't know or could not make an inference about what was occurring. Here's the first one. Around 2002, my brother suggested trying out a new location further down the river than we normally hunt. He ran me down the river on the boat and dropped me off next to a slough. Then went back upriver to go in the woods himself. This was for an afternoon hunt. So heading in the woods around 2 p.m., I walked about 250 yards away from the river, east, along the bank of the slough, until it began to curve upriver. Then found an oak to climb with my tree stand. As I sat there, I started to notice that there was nothing going on in the swamp. Normally, there is a lot of background noise and movement, birds, insects, etc. The only time that stops is when a predator moves through or a major weather shift is about to occur. But this silence just kept on. I then started to hear something between me and the river, slightly downstream of me, that sounded like squabbling raccoons, but quieter. Nothing else happened all afternoon. It was just slightly off-putting, the definition of oppressive silence. It began to get dark, and I decided that I was going to get out of there a few minutes early. Got down and started assembling my gear. Lashed the stand together, get out the headlamp and flashlight. As the sun was setting, got my stand on my back and took a few steps toward the river when, between me and the river, there was a call I have never heard before or since. A sharp, loud, piercing noise. For some reason, all I can think was, that's a 4-foot-tall parrot. It was immediately followed by a growl, big, deep, and lots of volume. I can't put enough emphasis on what the growl sounded like, or how long it rolled on for. My brain immediately went to followed by an 800-pound tiger, and then realized that's between me and the river where I need to go. By now it's dark. A deer went by me at a fast walk. I heard rapid hoofsteps, maybe only 15 yards away, and a few seconds later, I can hear the noise again, but closer. I heard no steps, wings, branches, nothing. But that call was about half the distance between me and the river. I'm still standing there, frozen. A third call, closer now. By now, I'm well past freaked out. I turn on the flashlight, headlamp, jack around into the rifle, and sort of squeak out, "Hey." Not a profound hey. I would like to think that I would have responded to that call with a throaty, "Don't mess with me." But no, I was pretty puckered up, and all my 6'2", 220 pounds can muster. I'm sweeping the woods with the flashlight and headlamp, with the rifle now loaded and safety off, and I see nothing, hear nothing. Nothing is moving, and in a few minutes, I hear the boat coming downriver and see the spotlight. As soon as I saw that, I start to hustle down the slough bank, talking loudly. Got to the river bank, jumped in the boat, and told my brother to get the hell out of Dodge. I told my brother and the other 2 folks we were hunting with, and the consensus was, yep, strange things happen in the woods, and we don't talk much about it. Here's the second one. Palmetto Bed. Maybe 5 years later, after a good morning hunt, my brother and I met up in the woods on our way back to camp for lunch. On our way, we passed near a saw palmetto clump. At this time of day, the animals, deers and hogs, have bedded down. These palmetto clumps are prime bedding sites. They are higher and drier than most of the swamp around them, and great cover. So what we do is split up. One person works wide around the outside of the clump, while the second waits a few minutes and then quietly works through the clump. The idea is that an animal would normally hold in the clump to let you go by, but will ease out if somebody is coming in, and the forward person might get a shot at them. So my brother goes in as I'm waiting outside, and in a few minutes I hear a, Mike? Come in here." I work my way in, and he's standing, looking at a 6x10 space in the middle of the clump, tiled with broken off saw palmetto fawns. Green, freshly broken off, evenly distributed to make a nice ground cover. I looked at them to verify that they were indeed snapped off. No bite marks, no tool marks. There were maybe 60 to 80 fronds, one layer deep, nicely spread to cover the entire area. I saw no hair. There was no smell. Just a bed of palmetto fronds laid out nicely in the middle of the clump. Now, it only takes around 10 to 15 pounds of pressure to break off a palmetto frond, but you need opposable thumbs. I looked at my brother. He looked at me. We did not say one word. Just walked out there and went back to the boat. No discussion. A few years later, he texted me to say that he had found another one of those beds in a different area altogether.